Is basketball considered a sport now? Because it's not for me.
It's so dreadfully boring.
It is
I
dreadful.
don't.
It is dreadfully boring. It is.
I think part of the problem I have is basketball is like my ranking of sports, which I am, this is like the worst person to possibly talking about sports. Anyone who knows me is like, what are you doing? Abort, turn away. This is not a conversation for you. But like baseball is one of those ones where it's extra stressful because at any given point, it is not a team sport. It's a one-on-one sport. It is the pitcher versus the batter. It is the runner versus the baseman. Like it is a weird thing where all of the stress at any given moment is on the batter and the pitcher not to screw it up. And you would think I would like that because then it becomes much more like I like tennis. Tennis is a constant back and forth with really skilled people testing each other, and it's like really fascinating, interesting to watch. I don't find that to be true of baseball, but also I find it somehow, maybe it's because it's even more stressful in a way that like watching Tom Brady and the Patriots, which I had to do because I moved to Boston in 2002, and so that was my only choice to be a fan of the Patriots. But like, yeah, Brady screws up and it's bad, but he most of the time screws up because his defensive line lets someone through. It's like it's a true team sport, and so the pressure is like distributed across more people, and that makes it somehow less. I don't know how to justify why my brain does or doesn't like things, but for some reason hockey just doesn't, basketball doesn't do it. I don't know.
No, for years I wasn't a big hockey fan. Like I go to the Bruins when I get offered tickets.
Right.
It's only been in the last couple of years, like where I sort of said, I've been in soccer since I was 5. Like 6-year-old. I gotta latch onto another sport because watching MLS is not gonna do it for me, right?
No.
But hockey, I get that. Like baseball is romantic though. Baseball marks the time. Baseball is beyond sport, right? If you're watching it for a sport, you got to be really, really into it. But I don't watch.
Sure.
I don't go to base. I didn't go to Fenway
Right.
and focus on the game. I was like, man, this place is like it's been through world wars. It's like I don't know. There's just something about Field of Dreams was filmed there, right? Like they have a scene there. Basketball for me is like you're throwing a ball in a hole over and over, and I can't think to myself like, how many times can I see somebody throw a ball in a hole and be excited? Even when they jazz it up a little bit and do the slam, I'm like, well, that was just aggressively throwing the ball into the hole.
It's just fast-paced team golf. Like it's golf with multiple people in a smaller area more quickly. Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human element. I could go on for an eternity about the people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people to do that than Kevin and I.
And that's why we've started to have more guests on this show. If you have a topic that you'd like to come discuss or rant about, drop us a note and come be a third chair for an episode or two. Also, a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or submit them on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking to a coworker or something. On this week's show, we've got more Reddit questions that we'll take a shot at answering and trying to help some folks out. And then we've got some news stories we wanted to share and discuss as well.
Yeah, we got a lot of content to get through. Gonna be
This is definitely a two-part episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back.
Sunshine razors, mustachio questions, sunshine razors, shave it for later.
Oh God, wow, I'm leaving that in. That was dreadful.
Now recording.
All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call User Stories, where we'll eventually hopefully be answering questions that you, the listeners, send in. But for now, I think we found some interesting questions on Quora and Reddit that we can tackle. Little Specialist 964. That has to be one of the fake ones, right? Did someone choose that, or is that just the Reddit generated name? Little Specialist 964 on Reddit. What is the most efficient way for UX to work alongside development within the Agile 2-week sprint methodology? They're a senior product designer, and sort of say yes there where they probably should have figured it out by now that they're a senior product designer. They're working with a small 150 people company, not quite what I would call small, but I suppose it depends. And they are commenting about how, every company does Agile differently. Yes, correct. We'll continue to go on our Agile rants, and are sort of struggling to understand how they're supposed to fit UX into that 2-week sprint process that Scrum has. I'll point out Agile doesn't, Scrum does have the 2-week sprint process, and are asking for advice on what to do and how to do that. And I will say just right off the bat, this is, if this podcast is mostly about AI, the other half of what this podcast is about is just how terrible Agile and Scrum are. And I think this is a perfect example of nowhere in the Agile Manifesto or the Scrum Handbook does it talk about UX. It just sort of makes this assumption that like the problem that they were trying to solve for with Agile was really small, like client request projects, and they weren't actually building software platforms that were going to have mobile devices. Like no one anticipated, or maybe they did and they just didn't care. They didn't like working with UX. It's not clear to me why this thing that's so vital that people have incredible skill sets in UX teams to understand how to research good user flows, how to design and mock up wireframes, and like there's a whole good process that UX can bring to your teams rather than just like trying to take a user story and have one of your front end engineers kind of hope they can figure it out. Like UX is an incredibly valuable partner who can help you figure out good user experience. Like that's a thing, and it's baffling to me that these frameworks that have lasted for 20 years, as the web has gotten even better, as mobile development is even making that even harder. A good mobile user flow is actually really hard, and none of these frameworks incorporate or help you understand how to get UX into that feedback. I don't know. I have some thoughts. I don't know if you got an initial gut reaction to this.
Yeah, I guess the challenge for me is it's been different every place I go.
Right.
And I'm not sure I ever settled in, and I'm not sure I ever settled in and said to myself, one of those places just did everything better. So it's kind of difficult to separate and say, this place, these guys were really good at this.
Right.
Because one of the worst process places I ever worked, we got really good about planning ahead. So we did actually have design time. At least I think we got good about 2 or 3 sprints ahead, right? We were designing for those sprints. We got really good at that, but then we failed at some of the other fundamental sort of sprint qualities.
Sure.
I know UX design sprints. I'm not sure. Maybe you have experience of that. I've never actually implemented like a specific UX design sprint. So was that work alongside while the technical team is working on something else? The UX design team are going through a sprint and taking a little bit of time to work with stakeholders from the back end engineering, data engineering, and sort of working on that UX design. I could see that working actually, but I haven't experienced that myself.
Yeah, well, and I think there's so many dependencies that it means product has to have that idea prioritized and ready to be groomed by the engineering team. And then before you go to the engineering grooming, you got to spend however long that takes with the UX team. And so, yeah, like you're saying, like you got to be a couple of sprints ahead. And that's tricky too. Like the reason why Agile and Scrum are all, we're not going to commit to a date. We got to let the engineers find the right path and get to, having that flexibility. UX is kind of the same way. Like if UX is going to try and iterate on a design and figure out what's going to be the right path forward, and they're going to put it in front of users, and the key user that we want to hear from at this client partner of ours is out on PTO for a week, so we're now not going to get that feedback because they're a really critical stakeholder for this feature and this capability, then they are also now on a weird flexible time schedule. So it is really the kind of thing where you got to figure out how to give yourself that padding. And I've seen UX teams work in sprints, but it's kind of weird. It's kind of like why data science doesn't quite fit into Scrum and sprints, because it's so variable, and you can get 2/3 of the way through what seems like a really good journey and flow and design and realize, oh crap, when it comes time to click the launch button, actually you need to do a bunch of things that we didn't take into account back on step 2. We need to reflow the whole thing. You might not realize that until you're a week and a half into the design work. And so it needs that flexibility. So it is sort of a weird, flexible, just like engineering wants the flexibility to implement and say, okay, we think right now we're probably by the end of the next sprint going to be done with this epic, UX is kind of the same way. It is a weird balancing act. It is a weird flexibility that you need to provide and give everyone the padding and the space to do it, but it's worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, I wonder too. I've experienced it, and now I'm kind of looking back, thinking, I wonder if we had such rigidity in certain user interfaces that I worked in because there wasn't a process for the UX design. So
Right.
it always felt like this big thing, like, oh, we wanna change the UI, and then now it's like a cross-functional stakeholders from everywhere. You got product, business, sales guys in there, sort of piping up, and actually, really, it was just sort of we didn't have a process we didn't have this quick cycle to test things out and say, this is what it would look like. Like it's not drastic, it's not too dramatic. We didn't break anything. So I wonder how much rigidity I've experienced in my career because we didn't have a good way to work with UX. They're always on the peripheral. Like,
Right.
it's like working with enterprise architecture at times. Like, oh, we're gonna go in there and it's what are they gonna ask us to replace the framework, or the one change? It's got to be across the 60 views that we have. I wonder if they kind of suffer from the same thing, where there's a
Right.
fear to even try to get started on that stuff.
Right. Well, and I think that's where Agile and Scrum don't really tell you what you're supposed to do to plan for that kind of stuff. So the way it's sort of described is like you show up to the grooming, the product manager has written some user stories for you, and in the grooming you figure out what does that look like, and then that grooming is usually then followed by sprint planning at some indeterminate time afterwards. And it's like that grooming process might have UX going and saying, hopefully you're including UX and saying, okay, is this a thing we can just plug into one of the current screens? Is this a brand new flow? And UX should come out of that and say, oh, we got to go do some research. And I think Agile has this weird, it feels like the way people interpret Agile and Scrum is we don't need UX because what we're going to do is just build version 1 of it, put it out at the end of the 2-week sprint and get users to use it and get that feedback from them and realize, oh, we screwed up and didn't do the buttons in the bottom corner instead of the top and it doesn't make sense to people. We'll just fix it in the next sprint. And that's weird. Like you wrote all of that code. You could have had UX go and do workflow and design and user testing, and during the user testing they would have found out that the button shouldn't be in the bottom corner, it should be in the top, and you would have avoided writing code. Yes, technically it would have been I'm making air quotes on a podcast, it would have been delayed to not get the feature in front of the users, but you got the Figma, the wireframes in front of the users and got that feedback one way or another. You got the feedback one way or another. It just avoided engineering code. And for some reason, Agile and Scrum seem to just be like, no, just write the code and get it in front of people. And maybe that makes sense when you're Facebook and you have 1 billion users, and so engineers just pulling out 10,000 users in a 3-day test to see whether or not that button works in the right place, and you get statistically significant information to tell you if it's successful or not. Maybe that's an approach that works, but most companies aren't Facebook, and if you're in a B2B environment where clients are paying you directly for this software, you probably want to let UX help you test that before you write any code. I don't know. It seems like you should be okay with that trade-off.
I wonder if it's weird because I think humans are in everyday life. We are agile. I go help my friends move apartments or move house, and trying to take a piece of furniture down. It's like, let's try this. All right, doesn't fit. All right, open the back door. We'll tie a rope around it and we'll lower it down. Like we try things and we fail and we learn and then we try something different. And I wonder if a lot of these questions, like I often feel like that with Agile, like just try something.
Right.
At the beginning of the next sprint, stick your UX guys in there and see how it goes, right? And that's the thing. You got the retrospective at the end. Like if they don't like it, mad sad glad, you can sit and talk about it, right? Like, but try something, and eventually you'll hopefully be in a better position than you are today, which is doing nothing.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is no one pays attention to both Scrum and Agile are telling you to do exactly that. And yet we're stuck in these corporate worlds where, well, we defined the process in 2022 as X, Y, and Z. Why would we deviate? That's the corporate process. And it's like, no, if you are Scrum and Agile, then you're allowed at the end of every sprint retro to decide that the process needs to change.
Yes, and I got to tell you, that is one of my biggest mental turnoffs when I'm in a company that is telling me we're going to roll out a new process. Because and when new process comes down, I'm thinking to myself, but I'm in Scrum, I'm in Agile, right? Like I can just try these little things. Now I got to wait, and I got a 6-month free training of how we're going to do these things. And I'm thinking to myself, but I can try something next week. And if it's good,
Right.
I'm not going to continue doing it because the corporate pushdown is telling me I can't do that. So yeah, that's where humans, we hear Agile and then we cease to be natural at just trying things, right? Now
Right.
it's like, yeah, it's almost like handcuffs to this invisible set of next level principles that you can't try that because it's not written down. It's like, I'll do whatever
Right.
I'll do whatever the hell I want in my sprint, right?
Right. Well, and I think that's why, our process today is that discovery squad scenario where we bring in enterprise architecture, UX, the product owner, the product manager, the engineering lead, and we all talk like in a pre-grooming discussion about what is this feature, what is this capability, what is this enhancement, and start to understand, oh, that does need a UX flow, that needs enterprise
Yep.
architecture to help us with something fundamental. And you make those decisions early enough that you can then plan out a little bit of the time. It doesn't mean you can't be agile. It doesn't mean you aren't still breaking it down into epics and sprints and user stories and delivering incremental value, but there's no reason you can't say, okay, on March 1st, we're going to all talk about this thing. UX is going to go away for a sprint, 2 sprints. They're going to do a bunch of that testing and design and feedback, and then come to the backlog grooming where we now
Yeah.
have concrete things to split into stories.
And let me tell you what that does too is DevOps have been struggling. Well, they're not struggling anymore. It took them, because I was a DevOps engineer back in '02, right? Before they even had a name for it. And we tried to figure out how to be in sprint. And for 10 years, we struggled to figure out, like, how do we get DevOps closer to the sprints? Because they're building infrastructure as code. And as I got more and more like development, it got easier to be in sprint, right? Or close to the sprint. Other groups haven't had that success. Security architecture. In an EA practice, you were constantly going back to security architects saying, hey, I want to review something with you that I've seen that is designed already, right? And they come in
Sure.
and they're like, yeah, none of this is going to pass, right? Like, I don't want you to build this. What I love about what you had just said, what did you call it again? Herding cats, or what's the what's the process?
The discovery squad.
Discovery squads. I love that because it allows enterprise architects to start tapping on shoulders and saying, security architect, you probably want to sit in on this alongside me so we can talk a
Right.
cloud center of excellence or compliance and governance. Like, it does start to feel more holistic, like everybody's finding out at the same time. That's where my next level of research is going to be. So I do love that. Yeah.
And I think if you're in a company that you can't introduce that, you have some weird corporate mandate reason why you're Scrum, but you're not really Scrum, so you can't change any of this. I would say that the ceremony that you can fit this into is your backlog grooming ceremony. Start to get from your product people the idea and the prioritization and push them to have that as early as possible so that you can have the backlog grooming on March 1st. And instead of working on that in sprint planning on, March 15th, you might not do that sprint planning until April 1st, and you give enterprise architecture, security, UX, all of these people the time to do that. I will say UX, though, just like engineers have to be okay with, I gave you an estimate and natural things happened and that estimate is now wrong. That's fine. No one's trying to go back to waterfall and you all must work over the weekend to hit Monday's deadline. But I will say, when you get into these patterns, UX also has to get better at estimation. And UX has to start to realize we don't have to necessarily work in a sprint cycle. I've seen UX teams work in sprint cycles and do okay with it. But even if you don't work in a sprint cycle, UX people need to invest in the estimation skill set that engineers are forced to invest in. So that, again, we're not going to hold UX to, you told me you were going to have it by Wednesday, and legitimate reasons why you can't deliver it until the next Monday. That's fine. But your estimation needs to get better so you can help people understand, oh, do we need to have the sprint planning 2 weeks from now? A month from now? Like, you need to help your teams be able to plan around you. And again, there's gray room, but it can't be just like, I'll get back to you with the new design as soon as I'm done with it. No, you got to learn estimation skills just like everyone else.
Yeah. So I do have a UX joke, by the way.
Oh gosh. What am I about to edit out?
Why don't they get invited to a lot of the design sessions? Because they're always giving funny looks.
What?
LUX. Looks.
L- what? How is that? What is
You-
looks? Why is LUX a...
LUX.
What?
Looks. They're always giving funny looks.
No, what is the L in this acronym? What
Anyway,
are you doing?
Little
Okay.
underscore specialist 964. You heard it. You got to fight for your right to partake in better meetings and try stuff.
Yes.
Right? Try stuff. And change. Like, change.
Yep.
Adapt. Be agile.
Yes. Hopefully not racist name Indian Kelly 22 on Reddit asks, I'm from a design background and currently expanding my skills for product management. How many of the product managers know SQL? And how do you use it in your everyday work? I think my sort of glib jerk answer is not enough. Not enough product managers know SQL and are doing the kind of data-driven things that I would like to see all product managers start to make decisions based on a deeper understanding of what's actually going on in their software. And that doesn't only require SQL skills. You can have, if you're mostly a browser-based solution, you hopefully have instrumentation monitoring all of your user actions, and you're using a Pendo or an Amplitude or a something to understand what people are doing in your app. But I would love more product managers to be making data-driven decisions based on things they're actually seeing in the data. So I don't know what the answer is in terms of actual number of product managers who do this. I appreciate that the product managers on my team are actually right now going and learning some SQL stuff and how to get their database access because they're new to the team. But yeah, I would like more product managers to do it.
So I looked at this and I think it's huge. Hey, knowledge is knowledge, right? The reason why I say this about SQL in particular is there's been a lot of abstraction layers built over the years for more complex databases. So search engine, Elasticsearch was never an easy technology to sit on and query. It's a very difficult
Right.
concept when you start to get into like matching the fuzziness of the results and the scoring, and it was very complicated. One of the things Elasticsearch did around, I'd say in the version sevens and up, was introducing a SQL layer. So non search engine folk could go in there, and it's not perfect because you're taking a relational
Sure.
concept into a non-relational world. Another framework, KSQLDB, which is like real time and streaming, is like SQL basically for real time and data in motion. So I think having a base level understanding of SQL, I do think that one's like one of the ones I'd call out, like being able to sit with a product guy and actually work in a platform where I can write KSQL and say, so you want this data and this data, we're going to join these two topics and output into a single topic, or we're going to create a stream, do some logic in there, and then we're going to output that stream to a topic, and then somebody can consume that downstream. Super valuable, right? What I
Right.
will say is, and I don't think in the next year or two it's going to be gone, but I think a lot of the Copilot tools inside of these databases are going to reduce the need for SQL, or at least they're going to generate a lot of the SQL for you based on human interpreted prompts, right? It's going to be, how can I take my transaction data and link it to my product inventory table? And I do think we'll start to see a lot more product guys rely on copilots inside of databases.
Well, and I think there was a comment in the Reddit thread about, a lot of product managers were like, oh yeah, I just use ChatGPT. I tell them the schema of the table and the question that I have, and they write the SQL for me. And immediately I was like, ooh, does your security team know that you just published your schema into ChatGPT, this public thing? There's probably some work about, copilots in different analytics solutions are presumably built in such a way to not let that information leak into the broader model, and they have all of those security requirements built in. And yeah, I think also we've talked about this so many times, these models still hallucinate. And so, you want it to be in a tool that is designed to do that in a way that ChatGPT still isn't. There are implementations of ChatGPT style large language models that are designed for that and are purposefully trained for that in a way that ChatGPT in general still isn't. And so even if you do go to ChatGPT to get your SQL starter, you're going to need to know SQL well enough to recognize, oh, for some reason it said order by all is one word rather than order spaced by. You need to know the fundamentals enough, at least, to check what ChatGPT is going to give you, setting aside the moral issues of you're using theft. I won't hang that up on all product managers. The other part of it, though, is how many companies are going to have product managers and engineers for the next still 5, 10, 15, 20, how many years? How many companies are still on DOS systems? Like, how long are you going to possibly run into a situation where you won't get ThoughtSpot, Looker, SciSense, one of these tools that has a Copilot built into it? How often are you going to find yourself in a company that still has, hopefully not an Access database, but a SQL database, a Postgres SQL database, a MySQL database, like any number of systems that a bunch of companies have probably built on top of in the last 2 decades? And that skill set is probably still going to be fairly valuable.
Yeah, you're right. And then the reason why I bring up Copilots, by the way, is all of the reasons you mentioned, is going to ChatGPT and dropping your schema in there and asking it to build you a query.
Yeah.
Not recommended. That's why
No.
Copilots generally are the safer alternative to that, right? Where you're embedded inside of the system where the data is.
Right.
You're hoping governance and compliance has done a good job making sure that that is the safe way to go. But yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see, certainly in some sectors too. You think about these smaller, older hedge funds, for example. They got 30 analysts on staff, and they got a handful of tech guys, and they can afford the new tech, but they got a bunch of data in Excel and Access, and they built a bunch of VBA over the top of that stuff. And now you're
Right.
thinking, cool, what? I got to go get like the Microsoft Fabric so I can get the
Mhm.
cognitive services, and I'm going to hook that in with my 4 software engineers and my 2 IT guys. Like, good luck with that. So, but yeah, I could see that. I could still see us having, hey, we're still going to have jobs for the next
There you go.
we're going to have jobs for the next 20, 30 years. It's just going to be you're working in access.
Yeah. Well, but I think as a general skill set, regardless of how advanced technology is, I do think, hopefully you're not on G Suite. Apologies if you have to use Google Sheets. If you do have Excel, Excel has some really good Excel has that query pivot or whatever it's called. Like they put pivot tables on ACID and basically the query connections and the query capabilities. And I don't think you have to have a very advanced license to get access to this. Has some really powerful stuff that you can turn a spreadsheet into pretty much a database. You can do really advanced data aggregations and counts more than what you would do in a pivot table. But even a pivot table, I'd say learn a pivot table. Learn how you can take a couple, 1,000 rows of data that you can get out of some of your different systems and learn to explore that data. Group it by different data points, look for patterns. I think depending on when this episode drops, we'll have already talked to David, our data science friend, and some of the comments we had in that episode about more and more people can become data scientists as these tools become low code. I think there's an interesting thing for product managers to say, go and learn about some of these, go learn Excel pivots, go learn about some basic statistical analysis and learning some things. As you start to get into the data, you're going to notice false signals. You're going to not understand the data you're looking at. And if you haven't taken the time to try to figure out like, okay, what's the thing I'm not querying on? What am I doing the wrong group by? I'm noticing a pattern that doesn't actually exist. There's some skills that I think would be valuable for product managers. And also, by the way, when AI starts to replace your job, now you're halfway to being a data scientist and can go get a new job.
Yeah, agreed. And that is the essence of the what's the term? The citizen data scientist, right? For
Right.
any listeners that are interested in reading more about that, that is essentially the idea that we're gonna want the non-technical users to become experts in using these new tools and understanding more about the data. So citizen data scientist is increase what should increase your chance of living in that new world, right?
And I'll say from a product manager perspective, I might be slightly biased having formerly been an engineer. I was never the math style engineer. The math has always been the hang up for me. But if you can start to grok what's going on as you group by different things, as you pivot, as you query in SQL and see the results that you're getting, you'll start to uncover some really fascinating stuff about your software. You'll start to realize when you look at usage patterns, when you look at the data of who's saving what types of information into the database, and you're doing these counts of, okay, we have 7 different product types in this table, and I'm now going to go group by how many campaigns are using those product types. And all of a sudden you realize in a way you've never understood before that 90% of your customers are using email still. And you're like, oh boy, we spent a lot of time getting that Facebook and Twitter capability and no one's using it. And so being able to start to see that data and make decisions based on it is actually really cool. It's really fun to realize I get to go back to my executives and be like, look, I'm showing you these numbers. This doesn't make sense. We are going to stop investing in this until you bring sales and clients who actually need that.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, et cetera, is how data becomes information. And that fascinates
Right.
me. That people struggle with the difference between data and information. And data is data. And what Kevin just explained is how you start to build information from that data. And that is a huge skill. Even I've struggled with that myself over my career, where I've been so focused on the technical and the data, and you're almost just looking at it in tabular format, like, oh, okay, cool, the data type's good. I got my data quality. I got the data to where it's supposed to be, and then that was it. I was good. I was gone because I'm like, hey, product guys are going to come in behind me, and I think over one of the fortunate areas for me being in enterprise architecture is you're starting to have more of those conversations about how does this data become information, right? And that is the game now. That is what has become when people talk about becoming data driven. It's like that's the
Mm-hmm.
game, is turning that into information. So
Well, and I think an important reason this is a good skill for product managers is engineering has gone through a transformation in which they've, not all, but a lot of engineering has moved to what's it called? Is it test driven development?
yep,
Like what you start with the unit test. You
yep.
start with how am I going to prove that the feature works? And you build the test, and then your code has to deliver what you thought the test was going to do. And so it changes how you write code. If product managers would start with an understanding of, okay, in a month, as I want to evaluate the success of this feature, if I have to think through the query I'm going to have to go run on this SQL database, the stats I'm going to have to pull out of my tool, and know whether or not this feature is being successful or not. If you have that data-driven approach to your product development, you're going to give requirements to your engineering team, and you're going to notice and be able to say, hey, by the way, this is the query I plan on running at the end of it so I can evaluate the success. I'm going to go into Amplitude, I'm going to go into Pendo, I'm going to go into whatever UI monitoring tool and say, this is the query I want to get out of the UI. How many people are clicking on the new button? And that's going to inform your engineers' decisions on how they build that thing. If they realize, oh, the product manager actually wants to see what's the conversion rate from page A to page B, we were going to build it as a single page React app, and we weren't going to be able to get that information. They're going to design things differently. Your database design is going to be different. If you tell them, I plan on grouping by product type and being able to query how many transactions came in that way, they might not have built the schema of the database that way. And you, with some SQL skills, if you're participating in your grooming and your sprint planning and your understanding, and you're seeing the designs that people are putting together in the engineering team, and you notice product type is nowhere in this schema, you can raise your hand and be like, hey, by the way, don't forget, I got a query on this. And they might realize, oh, actually, we were going to do it this way, and it's actually this floating lookup over here. No, I need to query on that, make sure I can do that. So you can actually start to influence the technical implementation, which a bunch of engineers might hate, but I don't care. You need to evaluate this thing successfully. You should have an influence on making sure it's designed and developed in a way that you can do that evaluation afterwards. So yeah, data-driven approach is really beneficial in a bunch of ways.
Yeah, there's always a story, and I don't know how true this is, but I heard it about LinkedIn was, and it's not totally related, but I always think about data and the elegance of some companies and the way they think about data. And the search bar, I was told that LinkedIn will actually capture the search bar whether you search or not, because they want to know what you don't search on and then what you do search on, and what was
Right.
different about the original and why you felt compelled to not use that as a search term. And I always thought that was elegant, because it's like such a consideration of the user and how the users use in their application enough to care about the things they never searched on, but we can access that information. There's just no, it's so holistic in their thinking. Like, there's an
Right.
opportunity to capture, let's get it. We'll make something out of that, right? We'll tell a story from that data that they didn't give to us. Yeah, it's cool.
And, it costs money sometimes to do this. So there are tools out there that will monitor the entire user session, and then they will replay for you. The mouse hovered over the button for 3 seconds and then went over here and clicked instead. It's expensive. I'm not trying to offer, I'm not going to shill for a specific company, and you would need the budget to do this. But there's some really cool, technology's gotten really cool. There's some really cool analysis that you can be aware of for your software that can help inform better decisions.
Absolutely.
When we come back, we'll be looking at some recent news stories after this short break.
Short break, all the time, short break. Actually, can we really take a short break?
Sure.
I'll grab a cup of tea.
Okay. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call Market Factors, where we talk about industry news stories and trends we're observing. Mostly it's an excuse to rag on bad decisions and argue with each other whether some new piece of tech is worth it.
What's on the docket today, Kevin?
So our first item here is a story from The Guardian. One engineer's curiosity may have saved us from a devastating cyber attack. So an engineer at Microsoft named Andres Freund, Freund, F-R-E-U-N-D, Freund?
I would say frowned.
Fround.
Yeah, frowned.
Frowned was noticing some poor network performance in one of the tests he was working on, and dug into it and found that there's this Linux open source library called XZUtils, and it recently had a backdoor installed, and did some digging into what was going on and sort of uncovered this whole situation where Lasse, L-A-S-S-E, man, these European names, Lasse Collin had been maintaining this XYZUtils for years, but he was a volunteer and he was getting kind of tired of the work, and so in 2002, Kevin from the future just popping in to say 2022. All right, back to the episode. A user named Gia Tan started making helpful contributions, and there was sort of this online campaign that began to pressure this guy, Lasse Collin, to hand over the baton to Gia Tan, and in 2023 he did, and sort of retired from the maintenance, and Gia Tan continued doing just normal looking stuff, updating and maintaining this code, and then it turns out that secretly that person snuck in this back door into some fundamental plumbing of the entire internet, and no one noticed. It was a very apparently apparently a very elegant hack. That, I mean, these are open source tools. People are presumably reviewing the pull requests and stuff, and whatever they did was apparently very elegant, and only because this guy at Microsoft happened to notice a little lag in his, like, whatever thing that he was doing, and managed to go and raise the flag and say, we need to undo this. But whoever Gia Tan was working for, and I mean, I have to assume who is good at coordinating online campaign to pressure people. You have to imagine there's a chance there's a Russian bot farm out there helping this, but who knows who the actor was. I don't think they get into the details of being able to trace down who this Gia Tan person was, and possibly there could have been backdoor technology into, like, Linux open source libraries. Linux operating systems are used in the fundamental plumbing of a good chunk of the internet, and this backdoor could have opened up a ton of things, and we don't know what the possible impact was because they caught it pretty quickly, but really fascinating. And I think the article gets into sort of two key takeaways. We've constructed our entire technological world on top of open source technology, which is both good because it means there's no monopoly for any single company to control worldwide internet, but it does mean this kind of thing can happen. It is, I think the article calls it fundamentally insecure. I don't know that I would go that drastic, but it's a community driven thing. And their second point is we're critically dependent on this open source software that is maintained by volunteers. The entirety of the internet, not the entirety, but significant chunks of the internet have code written by people who do it for the love of it. And sure, that's good. That means, Microsoft or Google or Amazon or someone isn't in charge of the worldwide internet. But also, when this guy decided to retire and it became someone else's job to take it over, it was a malicious actor who took it over. And that's not great. It's just super fascinating to me. It reminds me of that. I think in last week's episode, I joked about that XKCD cartoon where the entire internet has a little tiny domino piece in the lower right corner that's maintained by Bob. And Bob does this work, and we're really critically dependent on Bob continuing to do that work. The internet, in certain ways, is this giant house of cards, as this sort of points out. It's super fascinating. I don't know what the alternative is. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but
it's really interesting, and I think the human element is as interesting as the technology element to this, which is I'm dying to know sock puppet accounts and started pressuring. Like, what kind of pressure was that? Like,
Right.
we hate your name.
The unpronounceable last A colon.
Yeah, like we looked at your code and it's trash. Like, what kind of, like,
Right.
what? Because this person was probably getting offline on an evening and saying to their significant other, like, they're picking on me again.
Why am I doing this for free?
Yeah, like they're picking
Yeah.
on me. They're saying my code is too good.
Right.
But it does.
Not enough backdoors.
Yeah, and it does outline adversaries. Like, we often worry about, like, whether we're secure enough at the technology level, but open source it's going to be fascinating, right? Because they're just human beings, and I've seen it myself. I've been really interested in an open source project, and you're always looking, right? When was the last contributions to this? 4 days ago. Ooh, I'm
Right.
so excited because it means it's up to date. 4 months ago, I'm less excited. Is this person losing interest? 4 years
Right.
ago, I can't use that, right?
Right. Yep.
So-
Exactly.
But people did, because for somebody 4 years ago, the last update was only 4 days ago. So they built something on that. And now that's in production on the internet.
Right.
And one day things are going to start to go boom because everybody's figured out. And it really is when we talk about, like, in a previous episode, we talked about that lineage in architecture with applications and IT components of vendors. Open source is like that. Anybody who's ever looked at a Node application and
Oof.
you start to look at the Node packages and you quickly 10, 20, 30, 40,000 packages, and just
Right.
one of them can be the gateway, right? So it truly is going to be an interesting couple of decades with adversaries, not just our adversaries, we're adversaries to them. So I'm sure we have our own little government branch of engineers looking at open source too and how to crack in.
I'm sure.
Stuxnet, that was the Israeli one?
Oh, I don't think I heard about that.
Stuxnet was probably one of the, and I shouldn't call it just plain open source, but Stuxnet was let me check my memory bank here. It was a multi-part worm that traveled on USB sticks and spread through Microsoft computers, and I believe it was what they used to derail the Iranian nuclear program.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's
I
gonna be.
think I did hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
Well, and you see something like it's XZ-utils, which not super descriptive about what it does, but that is, to your point, the node package with 10,000 packages in there. It's because both correctly and slightly concerningly, when you go full, let's remove all dependencies, it's not quite the same as like a microservice architecture, but that concept of we should break everything down to its fundamental component. And this little piece of code, all it does is parse numbers into strings. And then the other package, all it does is parse strings into numbers. And it's good because if at any point we find a better way to do one of those things, I can just go modify the 42 lines of code. I don't have to dig through. Like there are logical reasons for this, but when it explodes and now who's watching the watchers, who's noticing that package 9712 got a little thing injected into it, and every time it parses a string, it also does the other thing. Did anyone really bother to notice it? It's a string parsing util. Why would I, like, who cares about the pull request for that? You probably should.
So basically, we need, and I'm sure they have it, but the same compliance, governance, security architecture in DevOps and SecDevOps and DevSecOps, or whatever you call it. We need that for open source then.
Yeah, that's the thing. Who is monitoring the pull requests for XZ utils? If it's a community thing, but have we just been hoping that Lassie Colin isn't a total monster and everything downstream from it is ingesting it? Are there downstream systems should be doing some kind of verification and security auditing and things like that? But apparently this was elegant enough that it snuck through any kind of scan or anything. So yeah, super fascinating.
And there's some really interesting data here too. Like, is maintenance of open source going to be will it change through generations? Because we came through a fairly significant time of the internet, right? Like, I was there when there was no internet, right?
Right.
And then you have this wave of engineers in open source, and then communities formed out of it, and good companies, Netflix, Microsoft, Google, all the big ones, started to release their own products as open source. But is there a wave of engineers coming in behind us? Like, what happens if people are put off by the idea that AI is going to start taking engineering jobs? Who maintains these in 10, 15, 20 years?
This is the point I've been making to you on every single episode. The problem I have is if we're dumbing down, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I'm saying if the requirements for engineering in many beneficial ways no longer require me to understand the underlying C++ code that still powers the whatever router in the middle of the, mid-Atlantic, who now we either have an elite dying out breed of people, but also how do you educate enough people to become the backfill? Like, the reason the last name of the person is Miller is because their 32nd great-grandfather was the person who milled the grain, and that is their job title and became their name. Like, in 2250, is someone's last name going to be contributor?
Yeah.
Because they are the long line of great-grandchildren of the people who know how to contribute to XZ utils? Like,
and all of those projects are going to suffer from the same organizational human deficiencies that we experience in business, where the new engineer comes in because there's nobody else to step in, and they're saying, I got to go review 400,000 lines of code to understand what this thing does, because at some point it could break anywhere, and I'm part of the team to fix it. And it's going to be really scary, but I'm compelled to disagree with you. I'm not worried at all.
because AI is going to be smart enough to do it for itself?
No, I'm just not worried about it.
Oh, okay.
There is no good reason why I'm not worried. I'm just saying we'll deal with that problem. It will be a problem. We'll have
Sure.
to deal with the problem when we get there. That's my point.
But I think that's a good example of, at some point, that becomes the fundamental problem with AI too, which is AI still is software, and we're 250 years away from AI being smart enough to rewrite itself. So in the meantime, what happens when XZ utils is the only way that the AI model on the original part of the code understands how to read, euro to dollar conversions, or something weird happens, and like if stuff starts to break and we've all lost the ability to understand the underlying plumbing because no one's doing engineering jobs anymore, then AI is fundamentally now stuck not knowing how to write the dollar symbol. Like, weird things start to happen and break down. And so I would argue that we should be pushing for a continued investment in engineering as a skill set and not let AI overtake that industry, because in 50 years we are fucked.
I will respectfully disagree. I don't think it's going to be 250 years. I actually think AI is going to help us out of this hole.
Sure.
You heard it here.
Until it turns out that Jia Tan wrote some special piece of underlying foundational code that all of ChatGPT and all the large language models wrote, and we didn't catch that one.
Yeah, Jia Tan, if you're listening, you're a real D-bag.
Speaking of D-bags, Tesla recalls the Cybertruck for faulty accelerator pedals that can get stuck. Sort of similar, actually, to a topic we talked about a couple couple of episodes ago where Toyota had that significant software issue, but also one of the other issues that got muddied in that mix was there legitimately was an issue with the floor mats messing with the accelerator. And so Toyota was able to blame the software issues on the other legitimate mess up, which was the floor mats. Cybertruck ran into the exact same problem. Tesla had their accelerator pedals get stuck because one of the pieces would slide off and get jammed. So they had to do not just originally I think it started out as a warning and then it turned into a full-blown recall. So of course, unsurprisingly, the quality of Teslas is trash. Elon runs crap processes. No one is surprised by this. Anyone who's seen a Tesla come out of a factory in the last couple of years, you go watch the TikTok videos of just how terrible the manufacturing quality is. Probably what happens when you segregate your factories by skin color. Not great. And I think the delightful fact for me out of all of this is there was only the recall was for all Cybertrucks, and the number of Cybertrucks was 3,878. He can't even sell 4,000 of these steaming piles of ugly truck. It's great. I love how much of a failure this is for him because he's bad, this is bad, this truck is ugly, Tesla's bad. I love it. Full Schadenfreude enjoying this recall.
Yeah, but all companies have recalls. Ford recall like 500,000 vehicles because of...
Yeah, this is full confirmation bias. No, absolutely. This is just, I love seeing Elon fail. This is great. I'm enjoying this. Yeah.
We got to come up with a term for your Tesla rant. We need a special jingle that Kevin's going on a Tesla rant.
Another rant I can go on is a Twitter rant. So are we done on the Cybertruck? Anything you want to defend Tesla with?
I have a love-hate with the truck. So I'm in love with brutalism. Are you familiar with brutalism?
Yeah, the most ugly design philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of brutalism, and I haven't quite figured out how I feel about the Cybertruck. It looks like what a kid would draw, right?
Did you ever play in like the late 80s, early 90s? There was a Macintosh game, and it was black and white lines. It might have been green lines with maybe some red colors for the lasers, and it was called, what was it called? Spectre? And you drove around in a triangle tank, and you shot at other triangle tanks?
Yeah. I remember
That's what the Cybertruck looks like, is the triangle tanks from, I think it was called Spectre.
I am just doing a check now. I know exactly which game you're talking about. I thought it was an arcade game as well, too, though.
It might have been. I played it on our Mac at home.
Yeah, I didn't. We weren't rich, so I didn't have a Mac.
Excuse you. I was upper middle class.
Yes, Spectre. There you go. Good.
There you
Good
go.
call out. Yes, Spectre. It does. And so I have love-hate with it because I'm. There's just a brutalism about it. Would I buy one? Never. It's not in my... That would never be in my purchases. No matter how much money I make, I would never buy one of these things.
If only because for a truck, it seems to get stuck in what a Prius could get out of the mud that these Cybertrucks have gotten stuck in. Like, it just does not seem like a well-built car.
Yeah, for the other options, I'm just not sure what advantage it holds over better options. It just...
Right. It's got the pickup bed in the back, kind of.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of the Cybertruck.
No.
There is just something. It's almost a case study in a couple of 100 years, though, when people are looking at designs of cars. There's gonna be a special section at the end of the semester where you talk about the oddest vehicles ever made that actually were sold, and the Cybertruck will be on there, right?
It absolutely will. Well, and I think it's a weird, like, he didn't read the market wrong necessarily. Like, there is a weird trend in, like, the F-150 or whatever the Ford pickup trucks are have gotten taller, wider, and more passenger focused to the point that the pickup bed is actually now like less than a third of the length of the truck, even though the truck is longer compared to what the model used to look like in the like 80s and 90s. There is this weird macho nonsense where you're not a man unless you have a pickup truck, but you don't have anything you need to ever actually haul. So you don't actually need the pickup bed. You just need the appearance of a pickup bed. And that is what the Cybertruck is. That's what the current Ford pickup trucks are. They are toxic masculinity made into car form.
Yeah, I think for me the challenge I have is it's going to be hard to explain. You could build this car as a joke, right? And Musk does stuff like that, right? Where he's like, "Fuck it, I'm going to buy Twitter," and then lay half the people off. And I could almost see them sitting around the design table and just laughing and being like, "Fuck it, let's do it. Let's do it. This is it. This is the body we're going to go with."
And that is why we should get rid of billionaires, because the amount of money that they wasted making the Cybertruck could have housed the entire unhoused population in Los Angeles.
Oh, well, I don't agree with that. They're two different buckets.
No, it's a bad use of money by a shitty billionaire who shouldn't be a billionaire.
Yeah, but that's like telling...
We throw away so much money in this country.
Like telling poor people what they can spend their welfare money on, right? Like you can't buy cigarettes because they're unhealthy for you, right? I don't think we can ever tell anybody how to spend their money. Not in
No, I'm
America.
saying he shouldn't be allowed to be a billionaire. That money should have
Oh,
been taxed out of his hands so that we could use it in other places. This country, though, as a culture, also, but no, but yeah, like one, the government should do better. But two, as a culture, it is ridiculous that we agree that a billionaire should be able to do the lark of a Cybertruck when we have starving children, when Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water. Like, as a culture, we should all be angry that we have the money. The money exists, it is out there, but we choose not to make ourselves better for it. Absolutely, once everyone is housed, once all the kids are fed, once education is capable, once healthcare is taken care of, we're still going to have $400 billion left over in this economy. Great, now go and figure out how to do the stupid thing, but don't do it while we still have all of these other issues.
I try
No.
to find the right word. I guess it's adorable the way you think.
That we should all agree on being better. Yeah, it's
I
it's
kind of, yeah. Maybe it helps that I didn't. Maybe it helps that I wasn't born here and I came in from the outside.
no one wants to be better in the United Kingdom. They only had the National Health Service taking care of everybody for relatively free. You come from a culture that actually did really good things
Yeah,
after World
yeah.
War II.
But but part of my challenge coming here was overcoming that and saying
Sure.
like holy shit, this is not like being back home, right?
Sure.
But I had to kill that part of myself to
Yeah, it's
some
unfortunate.
extent. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
it is. But I think for a lot of immigrants, it's probably true that we have to kill ourselves a little bit because it's the American dream, man.
No, the American dream has turned financial. It is no longer emotional. It is no longer about making sure your kids have a better future than you do. It's about making sure that you have the good future you want now. And whatever money that requires, you will do that. And you will hope that you're going to win the lotto, become the one Mark Zuckerberg out of the other silver spoon kids who inherited all of it. Everyone hopes they're going to be Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg's the exception. The Winklevoss twins and Trump inheriting their money is the rule. And so you will never be a millionaire. Sorry, it's just not going to happen for you, but you all vote in a way that is hoping that you will someday be a millionaire and therefore not have to pay the taxes, not have to worry about giving up the money. The American dream is financial, it's not anything else, and
Oh
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that's why I stuck around. You if you hate Musk as a billionaire, I'm pretty you wouldn't hate me as much as Musk because I don't have a strong political opinion on the things
uh-huh.
he does, but you would hate me too when you start to see the
Of
things that
course.
I would have in my yard.
Of
Oh
course.
boy.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I do tech news and I get AI fuels cloud computing boom for tech giants.
It is really fascinating that just the week before quarterly earnings, AI stocks all plummeted because Wall Street was concerned about the quarterly results. And then Microsoft and Google are up. Facebook's down. Meta's down because Mark Zuckerberg's answer was like, actually, this isn't making any money. I'm going to spend another 100 billion on it before it does make any money. And the market didn't love that.
Three of Wall Street's heavyweight technology firms have reported better than expected sales at their cloud computing units in recent days.
Which is also another sign that the economy is doing better than anyone appreciates because cloud spend was down last year because the economy was so soft. People were trying to save money. So the fact that Azure was up and GCP was up it's an interesting economic indicator. Not that it'll matter. Everyone will still be pessimistic about the economy because a Democrat's in power.
You know, there's going to be an interesting study one day. Probably AI is going to figure this out for us. Is how inefficient all the architecture in the cloud is. Not that cloud's a bad thing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Oh yeah.
you know how many companies are overspending in there because they're doing it wrong. And one
Fully.
day Amazon's going to turn around and be like they're going to have a moment of honesty, and these cloud computing companies are going to pop up and say, by the way, y'all spend $1 trillion too much. We're
Right.
giving you a
Right.
credit.
Literally, my last startup was doing exactly that for companies and trying to help you understand, like, you need to write little pieces of instrumentation code to send to us so we can monitor why you're running this piece of compute, and we can show you you're spending 40% of your budget on a feature that only makes up 2% of your revenue. Why are you doing that? That's
Yep.
insane.
But that's where I often joke, right? When I have quotes that I've had for a long time now, like wanting to put the science back in computer science. And that is yet another example of where I look and say, when did we stop caring? Did we ever care? We must have cared
Right.
at some point because
Finance cared for us. Finance was the one telling you, no, make it work on the current server. I'm not approving a new server purchase. Like, you had a finance person who had to approve all of that infrastructure and you had to justify why you needed it. I don't know that they cared, but they had someone in the driver's seat pushing back. Now, an engineer just logs into the GCP console, spins up 5 new virtual environments to test her cool little thing, and then forgets that it was turned on and lets it run for another 3 months and no one
yeah,
knows it. And you just burn $50,000 in cash.
yeah.
It's bad.
It's been for the last decade that I've seen companies where running IT and coming in and saying, hey, we ran the report and you got 100 EC2 boxes that
Right.
they're not being used. Like they got dummy names, but they're running. They're running.
And they're still running CloudWatch and charging you the logging file
Yeah.
time for the CloudWatch agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
it's insane.
it's got to be crazy how
Yeah.
much we waste.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember the name of the podcast is Jordan Jesse Go. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. To read articles we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptance criteria and on Discord. You can find links to both in the show notes and on the blog. And I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of them to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.